Hello, so we are here for another Spanish Media Diaries. So in this series of videos, I talk through the native Spanish media that I have been consuming lately, my thoughts on it. I don't repeat anything from episode to episode, but I do have a couple second seasons to talk about today. So we'll just get started with TV shows. So the first show that I finished was called Triada, I believe in Spanish, or Triptych. And this is very much so an Orphan Black knockoff. So if you are familiar with the Canadian show, Orphan Black, I believe it was Canadian, this show is really very much the same. So we are following a police officer or like a CSI tech who goes to the scene of a murder, and the victim looks exactly like her, and so then she's kind of trying to unravel this mystery. I did really enjoy this. I didn't enjoy it as much as Orphan Black, but solid show. I thought it was good. I kind of DNF'd, did not finish the show Autodefensa. I can't say that with a Spanish accent. This was a show on the platform Filmin, which is a Spanish streaming service similar to Netflix, or really more like HBO probably. That will come up more in movies, but this was kind of a short series about two girls living in Barcelona, I believe, who are kind of, it's very similar to the show Girls. They are kind of a hot mess, trying to figure out their lives, whatever. I thought that the first few episodes were very interesting. It is very much kind of the self-centered female protagonist doing things that we historically have only allowed male protagonists to do, kind of storyline that, again, is very popular right now that sometimes I really enjoy. I thought this one was okay, but then like the fourth episode or something like that, they had an extremely anti-fat episode, like really, really appalling, and so I stopped watching it. Then I finished the second season of El Reino, which is an Argentinian show that I talked about last episode of this. Really, really enjoyed season 1. Season 2. So overall, season 2 was okay. I didn't think it was as compelling as season 1. It felt a little bit wandering, less of a driving purpose, but it was okay. But then the last episode of season 2, right off the bat, we start out with like a very long essay and murder scene, and I just was absolutely infuriated that they showed this on camera, and not just showing it on camera, really dragging it out. I just think that that is completely inappropriate. Personally, I do not think that that should ever really be shown on screen, but I can see argument for including it sometimes. This was an instance where there's absolutely no reason. It only served to further your understanding of a bad character as a bad character. Like, truly, there was no justification possible. So I was very, very disappointed, and it really, really kind of ruined the show for me, you know, like I demoted the show in my list of favorite Spanish shows, because, yeah, it just, you know, this was not a show addressing that at all. Like, that was not a theme that was handled in the show at all. Truly, this was just thrown in for shock value, and so I was very angry, very disappointed. So if you watch the second season, definitely skip the beginning of the last episode. That makes me so irate. So the next show, though, took over as my second favorite Spanish show, almost tied for first, maybe. So that is 45 Revoluciones, or 45 RPM. And this is a kind of a historical show, but not really in the way that you'd normally think of historical shows. It is set in the 60s in Madrid, I think. And you are following employees at a record company. The main character is kind of a secretary at this record company, and she gets drawn into this basically new label that they are putting out for more hip young audiences. So rock and roll is kind of breaking into the scene and really struggling under the regime of Franco. And I just loved this show. They speak so fast in this show that it is actually incredible. So if you are a beginner or anything other than advanced and you start watching this and are taken aback by how fast they speak, do not fret. You are not, worse at Spanish than you thought. That's just how this show is. But still, so good. I really enjoyed it. I will probably rewatch this. Then I watched season 2 of Bienvenidos a Eden. They are basically conned into going out to this party, and then it turns out that they aren't really able to leave, and other nefarious things unfold. So this is basically just a continuation of them trying to get out of this. And yeah, the first season I really liked. It was nothing incredible, nothing groundbreaking, but I enjoyed it. And same with the second season. I didn't like the second season quite as well as the first. I think I probably gave the first season 3.5 stars, and I gave the second season 3 stars, if I'm remembering correctly. It wasn't the most focused storytelling that I've ever seen, but fine. Movies. I watched Las Niñas de Cristal on Netflix. This is very straightforwardly a ripoff of the hell is that movie called? Black Swan. Truly, just very straightforwardly a ripoff of that. We are following 2 young dancers in a ballet company, and their kind of relationship and people trying to keep them apart, and things go badly. This was not very good. I wasn't mad that I watched it or anything, but I just kind of sat there when it was over what? Because there's supposed to be this, they're acting like there's this toxic dynamic between them, where they're just destructive to each other and stuff. And but everything that you see of their friendship, their relationship is just pretty naive young girls, women. There was nothing toxic that I could see at all, and so the whole thing just didn't ring super strong. Yeah, but it was okay. I don't recommend it, but I don't not recommend it. The next 3 that I watched were all on the platform Filmin. So kind of just my thoughts on the platform in case anyone is interested. This has a lot of artistic films, so very highly acclaimed, award-winning films from all over Europe, all over the world actually. So if that is something that you're interested in, I do think that the subscription was worth it. I think it was €8 a month or something like that. And then they also have basically a rental program where you can buy tickets that then you use to rent films. You do have to be in Spain to buy the things, but you don't have to be in Spain to rent the things. So as long as you have the use of a Spanish IP address to make your purchase, then you're good to go. So I did really like this, and I probably will continue to subscribe to this at some point. I did cancel it right now because I was struggling to find things that were beneficial for me to watch, because a lot of artistic films and TV are very light on dialogue, very poor audio quality, so people are mumbling, and so it just wasn't the best for language learning. But I do think as a platform I will probably continue to use it at some point. But anyway, the 3 films that I watched, the first one was El Agua, and this was kind of a coming of age story, very beautiful, kind of washed out aesthetics. There are kind of 3 generations of women who have lived in this area where apparently they get flooding, maybe generational, once a generation or something like that, flooding. And it's basically just talking about those women, their relationship to the men in their lives, and their relationship to the water, to kind of floods. And so kind of an abstract film. No plot, just vibes. It was enjoyable. I liked it. If you have an opportunity to watch it, I would. Next up was Cinco Lobitos, and this was probably my favorite Spanish movie I have seen. This is set in Basque country, and so they do speak Basque and Espanol, more Castellano than anything else. It's just occasional Basque. But this is a young woman who has a baby, and she basically moves home to her parents to take care of the baby because her boyfriend or husband is traveling for work and not really available, not really participating. And so this woman is navigating her relationship with her parents, navigating being a new mother, being functionally a single parent. And this ripped my heart out and stomped all over it, but I do really recommend it. It was very, very sad. The last movie was Asbestas, which I believe was the Goya winner for last year. This movie is set in Galicia, I believe, so they speak Gallego and also Castellano, obviously. So in this movie, a French couple has moved to the countryside, and they are doing like organic plants, like organic produce. That's what I was trying to think of. A solar company wants to buy basically the whole village, like buy all of the property and convert it into a solar farm. All of the local people want to do this, all of the people who have lived there for generations, because they are very poor. They have basically no opportunities, no ability to get out of this place other than selling their land, but they can't do it unless they all do it. And so the French couple does not want to do it, and so the conflict arises between these two groups or neighbors. Yeah, this was a very disturbing movie. Quiet horror, kind of quiet suspense, very beautiful visually, very artistic. I don't think it was the best for learning Spanish, because anytime the French couple are by themselves, they speak French to each other, obviously. The neighbors speak Gallego to each other, and so the only time that you're really hearing Castilian is when the French people are speaking to their neighbors and vice versa. So, you know, I liked the movie. I thought it was a good movie. If you have the opportunity to watch it, I think you should, but it wasn't the best for learning Spanish. We will do podcasts. All of these I have listened to probably 5 or so episodes, maybe 5 to 10 episodes. So I haven't listened to massive amounts of their catalog, but I still feel pretty confident in saying that I listen to these podcasts. So first of all, we have Buceando en el Naufragio. So this is a political discussion podcast from Colombia, I believe. And so they talk about politics globally, locally, in Latin America, everywhere. As far as I can tell, very left-leaning. And yeah, I have enjoyed listening to multiple of the episodes. They had one on the Trump arrest and stuff, and just kind of hearing about that from an outside perspective, and not only an outside perspective, something that I find very interesting listening to podcasts in Spanish, which is the only language that I'm like good enough to listen to them in usually, is how much more free people will be talking about the US than they will in English, because they think that, you know, in English people from the US will be able to understand them. And so I feel like they are much more guarded. And obviously tons of people in the US speak Spanish, but I don't think that people have that in the back of their mind as much when they're speaking in Spanish as when they're speaking in English. So kind of a general podcast network or something called SARE Podcasts. I have listened to 2 of their podcasts so far, La Historia en Ruta and Mujeres con las Botas Puestas. These are both obviously historical podcasts. Historia en Ruta is kind of approaching history from a geographical perspective. So they talk about different people's lives or different events and look at kind of the route that took, I don't know. Mostly it just seems to be telling historical stories. So they had one about, what the hell is his name? Picasso. They had one about Picasso that I really enjoyed. Same with Mujeres con las botas puestas. These are just stories of women throughout history. They had ones about some pirates, Mary Wollstonecraft, I think it was the Bronte sisters. Very interesting. One that I just started listening to recently is Malditos Veganos, and this is obviously a podcast about veganism. I haven't listened to a ton of this yet, but I have listened here and there, and so far it is very interesting, just talking about different aspects of vegan morality, ideology, etc., environmental issues, that sort of thing. Just a disclaimer, I am not a vegan, I am a vegetarian, I am a vegan wannabe. And then I do have one podcast that was recommended on my last video that I checked out and have really, really been enjoying. So Alex E. recommended A la Aventura, which is a book-related podcast. The guy who does the podcast just talks about books that he's been reading, so usually kind of a summary of the book and then his opinions of the book, and then sometimes he'll have another section at the end where he basically talks about the book with spoilers. And yeah, I really enjoy it. Again, a very, very comprehensible podcast. He speaks very slowly, very clearly, and a lot of the books are, as Alex mentioned, a lot of them are translated either classics or translated from English, and so there's a very good chance that you will have read a lot of the books that he talks about if you read at all, and so you can kind of have an idea of what he's talking about, and that makes it obviously much more comprehensible. So that one was a great recommendation. Thank you. And then we will finish out with books. So the next book that I read after the last episode was Ans and Filtros by Ria something Parente, I think, and Selena Pascual, if I'm remembering correctly. And this is a YA, like an older YA romance that is a retelling of Anne of Green Gables set in modern times. And so Anne works at her adoptive mother's cafe called Green Gables and is going to her first year of university to be a writer. She's also an anonymous fanfic author, and she meets kind of her rival fanfic author, Gilbert Blythe, and they have, obviously beef, whatever, blah, blah, blah. So this was such a cute premise, and I absolutely loved the representation. I think that this could be really, really beneficial for young people to read. There's trans representation, bisexual, lesbian, all kinds of non-binary. There's all kinds of representation, and also discussion of, romantic love or love in general not looking exactly like the way that we've always been taught. And I think that all of that is so great. Unfortunately, I didn't end up absolutely loving this book just because I didn't feel like it really had enough plot. I felt like the main character was not super likable, and not in a way that was beneficial in any way. I think sometimes unlikable characters can be great, but in this case, I don't think she was supposed to be unlikable. She just wasn't super likable. And, that's obviously in such contrast to the original Anne of Green Gables, where I would die for Anne Shirley. And so that was just kind of a disappointment. But, it's really hard to write retellings. And so I don't blame the authors for that. But yeah, it wasn't a favorite, but it wasn't something that I was upset that I spent my time reading or anything like that. I listened to Lágrimas en la Lluvia by Rosa Montero. This is the first book in a sci-fi trilogy that I believe is loosely based on the world of the Blade Runner. And so you are following a detective, like a private detective, who is trying to figure out what is happening to these androids. She herself also is an android. Who are behaving very erratically, who are kind of attacking people or attacking themselves. And so she's trying to figure out what is happening. There's all these complicated human-android interactions. Because I only listened to this one, not read it alongside listening, I did not have a really strong grasp on the plot, or like I understood the overarching plot and I did like the book, but I do feel like I need to reread it in order to continue with the series, and I will probably read the series physically versus just listening to them, because this is kind of more plot filled than most of the books that I am reading, and so it had more complexity, I would say. So yeah, I liked it. I want to reread it and continue the series. I listened to La Cara Norte del Corazón, which is a mystery, kind of a dark novel, I believe is what they're called in Spanish. So this is the prequel to the trilogy, the Baztán trilogy, I believe, by Dolores Redondo, and that trilogy is set in Basque Country. This book is set mostly in the US, a little bit in Basque Country as well, but we're following a detective who goes to the US for an FBI training, but she ends up kind of working in partnership with them to find a serial killer who is targeting natural disasters, and it happens to be right before Hurricane Katrina hits, and so they travel to Louisiana to try to catch him there. Very, very interesting book. I think part of my problem with Dolores Redondo's books is that they are very, very detailed, very atmospheric. You know, she's trying to build this world, and a very similar author in English that I enjoy a lot is Tana French, and so I think that if I was more fluent, I would enjoy her books more. It's not that I don't enjoy them at all now. I like them a lot, but they always feel overly long to me, and I think it's a little bit unfair to say that as a language learner, but I think that once I'm more fluent, they won't feel as long to me. But regardless, I do highly recommend them. I absolutely plan to read the trilogy and read probably everything that Dolores Redondo has written, because I really, really like her stories. I finished this chunker, La Casa de los Espíritus by Isabel Allende. This is my first Isabel Allende, and it will be the first of all of them. I do plan to read all her books now. I loved this book so much. This is the second most difficult book that I have read in Spanish after the Gabriel Garcia Marquez book that I read, solidly between Gabriel Garcia Marquez and everyone else that I've read in Spanish. She's like right here. So she does use kind of literary Spanish. Like, I remember looking up one word that I think it's quan instead of qual, and I had never even seen that before, but apparently it's a literary form of the word qual that is no longer used in speech, only in literary words, and I was like, oh, learn something new every day. But yes, so beautiful, beautiful writing. This is a multi-generational epic story following a family in Chile, and I really can't recommend it more. It would be something great to work up to, but if you are kind of intermediate or want to take on the story, I think it would be really great, especially like it is a slow build, so give it plenty of time to like really hook you. I read La ridícula idea de no volver a verte by Rosa Montero. I read this for the book club in Leafling Learn's mini immersion server, Discord server, and I really, really enjoyed this. It was not my favorite book that I've ever read, but there were certain chapters in here that made me cry, that made me just marvel over her thoughts, her words. So this is kind of an adaptation of Marie Curie's diary that she kept for about a year after the death of her husband. And so we are talking through Marie Curie's life, through her, kind of biography, but we're also talking about Rosa Montero's life, who she also lost her husband. And so we're talking about grief, we're talking about love and life and everything, and art, writing, how people cope with loss or how people cope with fear or loneliness. and society, how society treats women, you know, all kinds of different things. And the first few chapters of this, I thought that this was going to be like an all-time favorite. I didn't enjoy the rest of it quite as much. There were certain chapters that I just could have thrown out entirely, didn't care for at all, but the biography of Marie Curie was very, very interesting, and Rosa Montero's kind of personal musings were incredible. So I do think that this is well worth the read. I read La Flor y la Muerte, which is by the same authors as Ans and Filtros. They do write exclusively together, and I really, really like these authors. I will probably continue to read many of their works. La Flor y la Muerte is the first in a series about Olympus, so it's kind of a sci-fi retelling of the Greek gods, and so we are following a bunch of young people who are basically competing to become future leaders of this corporation that is run by the 12 gods, or like the descendants of the 12 gods. And yeah, very, very interesting. Really, really enjoyed it. Again, a lot of great LGBTQIA plus representation, and I liked this one much, much more than Ans and Filtros. Then lastly, just really quickly, I listened to La Puerta de los Tres Cerrojos, which I have talked about a little bit in my 40-hour 7 days language challenge videos. This is a very, very short middle grade, like children's audiobook. I think it was like 3.5 hours or something like that. And so I listened to it all in one day at work, and I loved the premise of this book. It is trying to teach kids about scientific topics. Apparently it's a whole series, but the first one specifically, at least, I don't know if it branches out into different things, but it's talking about quantum physics. And so it's teaching them different like principles, like matter and antimatter and stuff, through a story. And it kind of felt a little bit forced, but it was like, okay, you know, whatever, this is cool. I'm sure when I was younger, I would have eaten this up with no questions. The problem was, it was very, very sexist, and it was written by a woman who is a scientist, so that was very, very disappointing to me. So our main character is a young boy who's like in high school, I think, and he goes and ends up kind of working with this fairy who is a doctoral candidate in quantum physics. And first of all he does is talk about her appearance, which, you know, I know that you could say, like, teenage boy, whatever. But she flirts with him all the time, which I'm like, mid-20s doctoral candidate flirting with a high school boy all the time. That sounds illegal. But also, she constantly needs his help with very basic concepts. Like, somehow he knows more about some of this stuff than she does. Like, he figures out things that she can't figure out, and that just doesn't sound right. There was also this scene where, so the Higgs boson particle is a rock star, and so he is coming onto the scene, and they're like, oh, who's that? So the Higgs boson particle, if you're not familiar with the science behind it, is what gives everything mass. And so she's explaining to him that he has groupies, that all of these girls are always flooding around him to figure out his secrets because they all want the perfect silhouette, insinuating that they want him to show them how to lose weight and stuff like that. Like, it was just gross. It was so fucking unnecessary. Like, what the hell? So anyway, I was livid when I read this book because I was like, this is such a cool idea, and then it's actually probably doing way more harm than good, like, subconsciously in these children's minds. And it was written in like 2021 or something like that, so there's no excuse, like, no excuse. Anyway, ending on a sour note there, but yeah, that is all that I have. I thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.